The aureate compass thrummed with the quiet pulse of privilege. Light spilled from chandeliers like molten gold, pooling over velvet chairs and polished marble floors. Laughter chimed against crystal glasses, each sound a note in the symphony of opulence. For those who dined here, the air carried the perfume of conquest. For Eva Reed, it smelled only of fatigue. The ache in her feet had become a constant companion, her reflection in the silverware a stranger with tired eyes. Each clink of cutlery was a second slipping through her hands, another reminder of a life that had veered off its path. She balanced a tray heavy with plates of seared scallops and truffle risotto, weaving between tables where fortunes changed hands with a nod. Her uniform was crisp, her smile practiced, but the echo of equations and dreams shelled for survival lingered behind it. Once she had imagined herself sketching reactor models on whiteboards at Caltech. Now she counted tips, not data points, her word reduced to orders and empty plates. Then he entered. Victor Hale. The name alone carried weight. Founder of Hale Dynamics, architect of the Hale Core, a man whose innovations in energy had reshaped industries and stock markets. His face graced magazine covers. His words moved markets. He settled into her section, surrounded by three investors in tailored suits, whose laughter carried the smugness of men used to owning the room. Ava steadied her breath and approached, pitcher of water in hand. Hale's presence altered the air itself. Power radiated from him, subtle yet unmistakable. He did not look at her when he spoke, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond, as if she were merely a shadow. "Start with oysters, Rockefeller," he said, his voice cool and certain. "And a bottle of Orphée, 5 Moace, the real one, not the cellar substitute." "Yes, sir," Ava replied, her tone even, the weight of his indifference pressing down. Inside her chest stirred the dull ache of resentment, the whisper of what-ifs. She should have been sitting across from men like him, debating designs, not serving them. 2 years ago, she had been a rising star, a scholar with a future written in equations. Then the call came. Her mother collapsed. The diagnosis is brutal, the bill is relentless. Dreams did not pay for medicine, so Eva had stepped off the path of brilliance into the grind of survival. As she poured Hale's water, he slid a weathered leather portfolio onto the table. The investors leaned in, curiosity sharpening their eyes. He unlatched it with a deliberate motion, revealing a single laminated sheet, aged to a soft amber. Lines and symbols spiraled across it, an elegant schematic crowned by complex equations. It looked less like engineering and more like art. The man murmured appreciation. "This," Hale declared, "is where it began. The genesis of Hale Dynamics, the original Hale core design." The words struck like a bell. Eva's gaze drifted to the bottom corner of the page, drawn by an instinct older than reason. In fluid looping strokes lay a signature she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. Daniel Reed, her father's name. The man who vanished a decade ago, whose car was found near the cliffs, whose supposed note spoke of failure and pressure, but never goodbye. For a heartbeat, sound fled. The restaurant dinned. Her fingers tightened around the pitcher until her knuckles whitened. She traced the signature in memory, the flourish of the R, the confident sweep of the D. Her father had signed every birthday card that way, every margin of his notebooks filled with formulas that reached for the stars. The realization thundered through her. The Hale core, the foundation of $1 trillion empire, bore the mark of the man the world believed dead. Her pulse hammered. The noise of the restaurant surged back, louder than before. She looked at Victor Hale, at his composed smile, and felt the first spark of fury pierce the fog of exhaustion. "Sir," she said, voice steady, eyes locked on him, "that signature, it belongs to my father." For the first time, Victor Hale looked at her. The veneer of calm fractured, surprise flickering like lightning across his face. The glass in his hand slipped, shattering against the marble floor. Crystal shards scattered like truth breaking free. The room stilled. Investors froze. Servers paused mid-step, curiosity rippling outward. Eva stood unmoving, her heart a drumbeat of certainty. The ghost she had mourned for 10 years had just reached out through ink and paper, demanding to be seen. In that instant, Eva Reed's life shifted. She was no longer just a waitress in a borrowed uniform. She was the daughter of a stolen legacy, staring into the eyes of the man who had built an empire on her father's name. The echo of breaking glass lingered in Eva's ears long after the shards were swept away. She moved through the remainder of her shift in a haze, her body obeying habit, while her mind spiraled elsewhere. Every glance at the polished floor seemed to reflect her father's name, carved into memory and now etched into the design that powered the fortune not his own. When the final table cleared and the lights dimmed, she stood alone by the service station, clutching her apron like a shield. The city beyond the windows glittered with the same cold brilliance that had devoured her dreams. Outside, rain traced silver lines down the street lamps. Eva walked home beneath a sagging umbrella, her breath fogging in the damp night. The words replayed again and again, "My father's signature." The conviction in her voice had been instinct, not calculation, the echo of a truth buried too long. Yet the world had responded with disbelief, and Victor Hale's eyes had flared with something far darker than confusion. It had been fear. Her apartment was a narrow box overlooking an alley, its walls lined with the remnants of another life. Textbooks on plasma dynamics are stacked beside a chipped coffee mug, a faded photo of her parents smiling at a science fair. She hung her soaked coat, turned on the single lamp, and sank onto the couch. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. A stack of unpaid bills lay on the small table, the ink smudged from nights spent staring at them. From the adjoining room came the fragile rhythm of her mother's breathing. Grace Reed slept fitfully, lost in a fog of medication that dulled pain but not memory. Eva rose and crept to the doorway. The sight of her mother, frail and still, tightened something in her chest. 10 years had hollowed them both, carving out joy and replacing it with endurance. Her mind drifted to the last morning she saw her father. With his tousled hair and ink-stained fingers, Daniel Reed is pacing the kitchen with a notebook in hand. He had spoken of a breakthrough, a design that could harness plasma energy with unprecedented stability. His eyes had glowed with the same fire that once told bedtime stories of supernovas and constellations. He kissed her forehead, promised he was close to changing everything, and left with a smile that carried secrets. He never came back. The police had found his car abandoned near the cliffs by the old lighthouse. A note lay on the passenger seat, its words heavy with finality, but void of warmth. They called it suicide. Eva called it impossible. Her father had been many things, brilliant, obsessive, stubborn, but never broken. The world accepted his disappearance as a tragic end. She carried it as an open wound, a question unanswered. Now the answer shimmered before her, signed in ink beneath the design of the Hale core. Every equation on that page sang with his cadence. Every line whispered his genius. The revelation ignited something buried beneath layers of exhaustion. If his work had survived, then perhaps so had his truth. Eva returned to the couch and pulled one of his old notebooks from the shelf. The pages smelled of dust and graphite, filled with equations that once danced beyond her comprehension. She traced a finger over his handwriting, steady and sure. so different from the forged tremor of the note left behind. A promise formed within her, silent but unyielding. She would uncover what happened. She would restore his name. But promises did not pay rent. Tomorrow loomed with the weight of unemployment. The manager's cold words echoed. "You're dismissed. No severance, no reference." Hale's influence reached far. A man like him could close doors she had yet to approach. Fear whispered of eviction notices and empty pill bottles. Yet, beneath the fear, another voice spoke louder. Defiance. She thought of the moment Victor Hale's composure shattered. His gaze darted to the signature as if staring into a mirror he could not control. That reaction was not innocent. It was recognition. It was guilt. And guilt was a thread she could pull. Ava turned off the light and sat in the darkness, listening to the rain. The city outside pulsed with indifferent life, but a new rhythm began to form within her. She saw herself standing once more before Hale, not as a servant, but as an adversary. The idea filled her veins with electricity. Somewhere within the maze of corporations and sealed records lay the truth. Somewhere, beneath layers of lies, her father's voice waited to be heard. She did not know where to begin, only that she must. The world had erased Daniel Reed. She would write him back into existence. As dawn's first light crept through the blinds, Ava closed the notebook and whispered into the quiet room, a vow forged in exhaustion and hope. This is not the end. Morning arrived, wrapped in pale fog, softening the edges of the city's noise. Ava moved through her small apartment like a shadow, every motion deliberate yet distant. The echo of last night's discovery pressed against her ribs, a quiet drumbeat of disbelief and determination. She brewed coffee she could not taste, its bitterness matching the restlessness in her veins. Across the room, her mother stirred but did not wake, lost in a medicated haze that muffled both pain and memory. Ava watched her for a moment, the fragile rise and fall of her chest, then turned away before sorrow could harden into paralysis. She dressed in silence, the black uniform folded neatly on the chair, now an artifact of a job already gone. The weight of dismissal had settled during the night, but beneath it flickered a new fire. If Hale had stolen her father's work, then he had left behind traces, and those traces would lead to the truth. She gathered her satchel, slipped the notebook with her father's handwriting inside, and stepped into the chilled air. The city was waking, its streets glistening from last night's rain. Ava boarded the bus with the others bound for shifts and errands, faces dulled by routine. She sat by the window, eyes unfocused, the world sliding past in blurred streaks of grey and gold. Each turn of the wheels pulled her closer to where everything had changed, the Orient compass. Inside, the restaurant was still closed, the air heavy with polish and perfume. She could see the polished mahogany table where Victor Hale had sat through the window. She imagined how his fingers rested on the page, the arrogance in his voice as he claimed creation. Her pulse quickened, the memory was vivid, and the signature was more unmistakable now than in any dream. Daniel Reed. Her father's name is inked on the design of a legend. She turned away before nostalgia could dull her resolve. The truth would not reveal itself through sentiment. She needed evidence, something solid beyond her memory. She began her search in the library, a sanctuary of dust and quiet hums. Rows of computers flickered beneath fluorescent light. Ava claimed a corner terminal and started typing. Victor Hale's name yielded oceans of articles, awards, investments, glowing profiles of genius and philanthropy. Each line painted a portrait of a visionary, a titan of innovation. But none spoke of collaborators. None mentioned Daniel Reed. She narrowed the search. Hale Dynamics Origin, Early Prototypes, Energy Division Archives. One article caught her eye. A piece from 20 years ago, describing the birth of a startup called Helios Innovations. A brief mention of a co-founder, initials DR, vanished after a dissolution agreement. Her breath caught. The words were few but sharp as glass. Helios Innovations. Dissolution. These are. The ghost had left a footprint. Scrolling further, she found a grainy photograph in an old trade magazine. Two men, outside a modest lab, their smiles bright with the confidence of discovery. One was unmistakably Victor Hale, younger, leaner, eyes alight with ambition. Beside him stood another man, hair unruly, notebook in hand, gaze distant, yet alive with thought. Her father, Daniel Reed. The caption called them partners on a groundbreaking energy project known as Aegis. Ava leaned back, the chair quaking beneath her. The room seemed to tilt. Proof, fragile but undeniable, flickered before her. Her father had not been a footnote in someone else's genius. He had been the architect, and his name had been buried somewhere along the way. She printed the article, her hands trembling slightly as the paper slid warm from the machine. The ink smelled faintly metallic, a scent that anchored her resolve. Tucking the page into her satchel, she began listing what she knew. Her father's disappearance, the forged note, the signature on the Hale core, the photograph of Helios, threads forming a pattern. Yet, patterns required witnesses, someone beyond herself who remembered the truth. Perhaps colleagues from Helios, investors and engineers. She scribbled names from the article, fragments of credits, and cross-referenced them with directories and alum records. Most led to dead ends. Companies dissolved, people retired or became unreachable. However, one name surfaced in an old patent filing: Edgar Wolf, a senior technician listed alongside Hale and Reed. She wrote it down, circling it twice. The library clock chimed noon. Sunlight spilled through high windows, catching motes of dust that danced like signals from another world. Ava closed her notebook, the weight of the coming journey settling upon her shoulders. For 10 years, she had lived beneath the story others told. A father lost to despair, a family left to fade. Now she carried the first fragments of another narrative that pulsed with betrayal and stolen light. She entered the city, the paper in her bag rustling like a whisper. Somewhere ahead waited the truth, and with it, the reckoning Victor Hale feared the most. The afternoon waned beneath a colorless sky as Ava returned home, the city's hum pressing against her thoughts. The bus rattled through streets slick with rain, each stop a reminder of how far she had fallen from the life she once envisioned. When she reached their building, the cracked steps and peeling paint greeted her like an old sorrow. She climbed them slowly, gripping the railing, her mind replaying the image of Victor Hale's face as the glass slipped from his hand. Shock, fear, and something darker had flashed there, a tremor beneath the surface of power. Guilt had a face, and she had seen it. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale air. Grace was awake in her chair by the window, a blanket draped across her knees, her eyes distant. Ava knelt beside her, taking her frail hands in her own. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was filled with unspoken truths, of sacrifices made, of dreams traded for survival. "You didn't have to quit," her mother whispered, voice thin as paper. "You could have stayed at school." Ava swallowed the ache rising in her throat. The past was a closed door, but it seemed to creak open again tonight. She remembered the letter from the university, the scholarship that covered only tuition, not medicine, not home care. The choice had never been real. Between equations and her mother's life, she chose the living. Grace coughed softly, a sound that seemed to hollow the air. Did something happen at work? Ava hesitated. The truth hovered on her tongue like a spark. She reached for it but stopped. To speak it aloud was to invite danger into their fragile peace. Instead, she offered a weary smile. "Just a long day," she said. "Rest, Mom. I'll make tea." In the kitchen, the kettle hissed, its rising steam curling like ghosts. She leaned against the counter, staring at the cracked tiles, and felt the weight of the decision pressing down. Hale's empire stretched far beyond boardrooms and laboratories. Men like him owned silence. They built walls of influence thicker than steel, buried truth under contracts and intimidation. Her accusation had already cost her a job. What else could it take? The knock came just as the kettle whistled, a sharp, deliberate sound. Ava froze. No one visited. She crossed the room, heart quickening, and peered through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood in the hallway, expression unreadable. His presence hummed with quiet authority. She opened the door only a fraction. "Ava Reed." He held a folder in one hand. "I'm from the management office. We've received notice that your employment at Compass has been terminated. Without proof of income, your lease may be subject to review." Her stomach tightened. She forced her voice steady. "I'll find new work. It won't be a problem." He nodded once, mechanically, and handed her a document before walking away. She shut the door and leaned against it, the paper trembling in her hand. The words were cold but straightforward. 30 days to provide verification or vacate the premises. Power, she realized, could evict as easily as it could employ. That night, she sat beside the small kitchen table with a letter beside her and the notebook open before her. The photograph from the library lay in the center, the faces of her father and Victor Hale smiling from another era. She studied them in the dim light. Her father's eyes were alive with curiosity, Hale's with calculation. Somewhere between those smiles had bloomed betrayal. The clock ticked toward midnight. Across the room, Grace slept again, the lines of her face softened by the pale glow of the lamp. Ava traced her father's signature on the schematic folded in her memory, each curve a pulse of defiance. They had taken everything, his name, his work, their security, but the truth remained, hidden in the spaces between ink and silence. She opened her laptop and began searching again. The name Edgar Wolf led her through forgotten archives, conference rosters, and patent filings. A pattern emerged, faint but discernible. Wolf left Hale Dynamics years ago. There has been no public record. Another ghost orbiting the same vanished star. Ava closed the lid and stared into the darkened window, where her reflection hovered like a stranger. Fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve, but beneath it burned a steady flame. The cost of silence was already too high. Her father's story had been buried once. She would not let it be buried again. Outside, thunder rumbled across the horizon. The city lights flickered, and in their brief dimming, Ava heard her father's voice, quiet yet confident. "Equations are only puzzles," he once told her. "Even the hardest can be solved if you refuse to stop looking." She drew a breath, folded the eviction notice, and whispered to the empty room, "I'm not stopping." Dawn crept into the apartment like a hesitant guest, spilling pale light across the table. Ava had not slept. Her eyes burned from hours of staring at old records, her mind spinning through fragments of memory and possibility. The eviction notice lay folded beside a cold mug, a quiet reminder that time was running out. Yet the thought of surrender felt impossible. Somewhere, buried in the remnants of her father's life, the truth waited. She crossed to the hall closet and pulled the string that released the attic ladder. It groaned as it unfolded, the sound echoing like an invitation and a warning. Dust drifted down in lazy spirals, glimmering in the early light. Ava hesitated at the base, hand gripping the worn wood, her heart throbbing with dread and resolve. For 10 years she had avoided this space, unable to face the echoes it held. Today, avoidance is no longer an option. The air in the attic was cool and dry, scented with cedar and forgotten years. Boxes lined the walls, some sagging under the weight of time. She crawled forward, brushing aside cobwebs, her flashlight slicing through the dimness. Labels in her mother's handwriting marked the contents: winter clothes, photo albums, Christmas decorations. She moved past them, searching for something unmarked, something older. Near the back, half buried under a blanket, she found it. The words DRWORK faded but were legible in a heavy cardboard box, sealed with brittle tape. Her breath caught. Kneeling beside it, she tore through the tape with shaking hands. Inside lay a stack of spiral notebooks, their covers worn thin, the edges smudged with graphite. She lifted one and flipped it open. Pages dense with equations stared back, the handwriting precise and familiar. Each symbol was a piece of him, a language they once shared over kitchen tables and late-night conversations. As she turned the pages, a sketch stopped her. A circular chamber threaded with magnetic lines, annotations crowding the margins. The same design she had seen in Hale's portfolio, only here it was raw, alive, evolving. In the corner, her father had written Iggy's Phase 2. Beneath it, a note. V is concerned about containment instability. I know I can solve it. The V could only be Victor Hale. Deeper in the box lay a manila folder. Inside were photographs. Her father and Hale standing side by side outside a squat building with a peeling sign that read Northwood Applied Sciences. They looked like partners, brothers in ambition, their smiles bright with the promise of discovery. Ava traced her father's face with her thumb, a lump forming in her throat. To see him alive again, even in ink, was both comfort and torment. At the bottom of the folder rested a single document, its paper yellowed, its contents typed in rigid legal language. A dissolution agreement between Daniel Reed and Victor Hale, dated 3 weeks before her father vanished. According to the text, Daniel had relinquished all claims to their shared intellectual property, citing erratic behavior and professional misconduct. The sum offered was insultingly small. Her eyes dropped to the signature at the bottom. Daniel Reed. But it was wrong. The loops were stiff, the confidence gone, the strokes uneven. She pulled one of the notebooks close, comparing the signatures side by side. The difference screamed from the page. The agreement was forged. A tremor ran through her as the implications unfolded. Hale had not only stolen the design, he had fabricated the paperwork to erase her father from history. And if Daniel had discovered the betrayal, if he had confronted Hale, what would a man with everything to lose have done? The attic felt smaller, the air thicker. Ava gathered the forged document, a photograph, and the notebook with the earliest sketches. The dust that coated her fingers felt different now. No longer the residue of neglect, but the scent of gunpowder before a spark. She tucked the evidence into her satchel and descended the steps, creaking beneath her weight. Back in the living room, she spread the items across the table. The fragments formed a pattern of deceit that stretched back a decade. She thought of Hale's reaction in the restaurant, the fear flashing through his mask of arrogance. He knew the lie might surface. He had spent years burying it beneath wealth and power, trusting the silence of those too weary or frightened to challenge him. Ava pressed her palms against the table, steadying herself. The fear that had shadowed her life was shifting into something harder and sharper. She no longer stood at the edge of mystery. She had crossed into its heart. Her father's disappearance was not a tragedy, but a conspiracy. His death, not fate, but design. She gathered the papers into her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and glanced toward her sleeping mother. The truth would be dangerous, but danger was already at their door. She whispered into the stillness, a vow forged in dust and memory. No more silence. The city shimmered beneath a pale afternoon sun as Ava stepped off the bus, clutching her satchel tight against her chest. Inside were the fragments of a life stolen, the forged contract, the photograph, the notebook alive with the questions that burned brighter than any lie. She had stared at them all morning, her mind circling one truth. She needed help. The scale of what Victor Hale had done stretched beyond her reach. Power like his did not crumble from whispers. It required the proof, witnesses, and someone who knew how to make the world listen. Her search had led her to a name whispered in old forums and buried in archives. Noah Grant, the journalist who once challenged Hale and lost everything. 6 years ago, his exposé hinted at a missing partner and irregular patents, but the following lawsuit shattered his career. Newspapers had called him reckless, a man consumed by obsession. Now, he lived in the city's industrial quarter, writing for a fringe blog few read. To Eva, that made him perfect. She followed cracked sidewalks past shattered factories until she reached a narrow building with paint peeling like old bark. Apartment 4B. Her knuckles hovered before the door as doubts crowded her mind. What if he refused her? What if he no longer cared? The memory of Hale's eyes, the flicker of fear when she spoke her father's name, flared behind her lids. She knocked. The door opened a sliver. A man in his late 30s peered out, hair unkempt, eyes wary. Yes, are you Noah Grant? Who's asking? My name is Ada Reed. You wrote about Victor Hale, about his company. The suspicion in his gaze shifted, curiosity replacing fatigue. He opened the door wider and stepped back. Inside, the apartment was a chaos of paper and wire. Newspapers blanketed the floor, whiteboards crowded the walls, and red string looped between names and dates like veins of conspiracy. In the center sat a desk overflowing with coffee cups and half-dead pens. "You've got 5 minutes," he said, motioning toward a chair. Ava sat and placed the photograph on the table. Hale stood beside her father outside Northwood Applied Sciences, their smiles frozen in time. "That's my father, Daniel Reed. He designed the Hale reactor, which is called the Hale core. I found this in his archives, a forged dissolution agreement and notebooks filled with the original schematics. Hale built his empire on theft." Noah stared at the photo, his hand hovering as if afraid to touch it. His expression hardened as she spoke, the old fire rekindling behind his eyes. He took the document next, tracing the shaky signature with a finger. "This isn't his handwriting. Number. I compared it to hundreds of samples. It's a forgery. And there's more. My father disappeared 3 weeks after this was dated. The police called it suicide, but his body was never found." Noah leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I tried to prove this once," he murmured. "Everyone turned on me. Editors, colleagues, even sources. Hale crushed the story and buried the truth under lawsuits." He met her gaze then, and for the first time saw not a waitress, but a fighter, carrying the same scars he did. "What do you want from me?" "Help me bring it into the light. You know how to trace the money, the patents, the witnesses. I have the evidence, but I can't fight him alone." Silence stretched between them, thick with ghosts. Then Noah pushed aside a stack of papers and pulled a notebook toward him. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Ava spoke, her voice steadying with each word. "About the restaurant, the signature, the attic box, the forged contract." Noah wrote quickly, his notes filling the page. When she finished, he rose and crossed to a whiteboard dense with scribbles. He wiped a corner clean and began sketching a timeline. Helios Innovations, Dissolution, Hale Dynamics. Names and dates aligned like constellations forming a hidden shape. There's a man named Edgar Wolf, Ava said. He worked with them at Helios. He might know what happened. Noah tapped the marker against the board. I remember that name. He vanished after Helios folded. But people leave traces. Old tax filings, club memberships, utility bills. I can find him. He turned back to her, eyes alight. Ava, if this is real, if your father was forced out and disappeared, we're not discussing plagiarism. We're talking about a conspiracy. Maybe even murder. I know, she whispered. That's why I came. Noah closed the notebook, the decision carved into his expression. Then let's finish what I started. Ava felt something shift, a weight lifting. The silence that had caged her for years cracked open. She was no longer alone. Outside, clouds gathered over the skyline, heavy with storm. In the dim apartment filled with maps and memories, two voices rose against the thunder, charting the first steps toward justice. The lion that Hale thought he had silenced was awake again, and it carried the roar of truth. Rain slicked the streets in a shimmering veil as Ava followed Noah through the narrow lanes of the industrial district. The storm had broken just before dusk, washing the city in restless motion. Water dripped from rusted awnings, pooled in cracked sidewalks, and mirrored the fractured glow of neon signs. They moved quickly beneath umbrellas, their footsteps echoing between walls of brick and shadow. Noah carried a folder beneath his arm, the fruits of a day spent scouring digital archives and forgotten directories. He had found a trail, faint, fragmented but discernible, leading to the last known address of Edgar Wolf. The name pulsed with promise. If anyone had witnessed the birth of the Hale Corps, it would be him. They turned onto a quiet street where the buildings sagged under the weight of years. A faded sign read East Harbor Residences. The entryway smelled of damp stone and old paint. Inside, a single bulb flickered above a staircase coated in grime. Noah scanned the mailboxes, fingers tracing over labels until he found it. E. Wolf, Apartment 2C. Ava's pulse quickened. She climbed the stairs behind him, each creak a whisper of anticipation. At the door, Noah knocked once, twice, then waited. Silence stretched. He knocked again, louder this time. A shuffle came from within, cautious and uneven. The door opened a fraction. A man peered out, thin, grey-haired, his eyes clouded but alert. "What do you want?" Noah held up his press badge, tarnished from disuse. "Mr. Wolf, my name is Noah Grant. This is Ava Reed. We are here about Helios Innovations, about Daniel Reed and Victor Hale." The man froze. His grip tightened on the door frame. Then, with a sigh heavy as stone, he stepped back and motioned them inside. The apartment was dim, curtains drawn tight against the rain. Shelves sagged under stacks of papers, binders, and old electronics. A pot of tea steamed faintly on the stove, the scent mingling with dust. Wolf gestured toward the worn couch, then lowered himself into a chair opposite. "I thought this would die with me," he muttered. "People stopped asking long ago." Ava leaned forward. "My father's name was Daniel Reed. He worked with you on the Aegis project. He disappeared. They said it was suicide, but I know that isn't true." Wolf's eyes softened with recognition. "Daniel, yes, brilliant man. We could see the solutions the rest of us missed, but stubborn. Too honest for the world he was building." He rubbed his temples, voice trembling as memory returned. When Helios started, it was a dream. Daniel and Hale built wonders in that lab. Then the investors came. Promises turned to pressure. Hale changed. He wanted control, patents, recognition. Daniel resisted. I warned him, but he wouldn't compromise. "What happened?" Ava asked. "Why did he leave?" Wolf looked toward the window. where rain traced trembling lines across the glass. He didn't leave, he was pushed. Hale drafted a dissolution contract. Daniel agreed to sell his share. But I saw him the day before it was signed. Angry, determined. He told me he'd never surrender his work. Then he vanished. A week later, the paper appeared with his name scrawled at the bottom. Ava opened her satchel and laid the forged document on the table. "Is this what you saw?" Wolf bent closer, eyes narrowing. "The signature's wrong. Too slow, too forced." Daniel's hand was confident, elegant. "This is a copy of a ghost." Noah scribbled notes, his mind racing. "Do you have anything from that time? Letters, drafts, project files?" Wolf hesitated, then rose and crossed to a cabinet. He returned with a small box bound with twine. Inside lay faded blueprints, handwritten notes, and the flash drives sealed in plastic. I kept these after Helios folded. Couldn't bring myself to destroy them. Thought they might matter someday. Ava lifted the sheet from the pile, her father's equations dancing across the page. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. Wolf sank back into his chair, the years heavy on his shoulders. "Be careful," he said. "Hale built walls around his empire. He buys silence, and when that fails, he buries it. You dig too deep, you might join your father in the dark." Ava met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then I'll bring a light big enough to blind him." Outside, thunder rolled across the harbor, and the lights flickered once before steadying. In the small apartment filled with relics of forgotten genius, the past had stirred awake. The truth was no longer a whisper. It had a voice, a witness, and a daughter unwilling to let it fade. Night draped itself over the city like a veil of smoke as Ava and Noah huddled around the small kitchen table in Noah's apartment. The lamp above them cast a narrow pool of light across scattered documents and aging blueprints. The air smelled faintly of rain and ink. Outside, the hum of traffic faded into the distance, leaving only the rhythm of their breathing and the faint scratch of Noah's pen against paper. The box from Edgar Wolf sat open between them, its contents spilling like pieces of a broken machine. Pages of equations written in Daniel Reed's steady hand. Technical diagrams labeled with dates and annotations. Memos signed by both Reed and Hale from the early days of Helios Innovations. And nestled at the bottom, the flash drive Walt had guarded for over a decade. Noah connected it to his laptop, the screen flickering to life. Folders bloomed across the desktop. Project Aegis, core simulations, and a final one named Ledger. He opened the last. Rows of entries filled the screen, lines of numbers and cryptic codes, dates corresponding to Helios's final months. Payments were routed through shell companies, accounts in offshore banks, and invoices for legal consultations that never appeared in public records. "It's a slush fund," Noah murmured, scrolling through the data. Hale moved money off the books to buy silence. These transactions, here and here, coincide with Daniel's disappearance. Ava leaned closer, her heart pounding as the evidence took shape. Each entry was a step deeper into the labyrinth Hale had built. Her father's name didn't appear, but the pattern was unmistakable. Someone had been paid days after Daniel vanished. The amount was obscene. She pointed at the line. "Who received this?" Noah clicked the reference code, tracing it through layers of corporate camouflage until a name surfaced. Linton and Gray Security Consulting. A private firm dissolved 5 years ago, registered under an alias traced to Hale's legal department. "Security Consulting," Ava whispered. "Or cleanup." Noah's jaw tightened. If Hale paid them, it wasn't for protection. It was to erase something. Or someone. The weight of the discovery settled over them like cold iron. Ava sat back, her eyes burning. The pieces aligned in a terrible symmetry. A forged contract, a banished man, a fortune built on stolen brilliance. The ledger was more than proof of theft. It hinted at violence, at a truth buried deeper than deceit. She closed her eyes and saw her father's face in memory. His warm smile, his restless energy, the way he had spoken of discovery as if it were a sacred calling. He had believed knowledge should illuminate the world. Hale had turned that light into a weapon of greed. "We need more than documents," Noah said. "We need a witness who can confirm these transactions, someone who handled the accounts or worked security for Hale back then." Ava nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. Men who took such money did not confess easily, but she refused to let fear root her to silence. Noah opened another folder, video logs, surveillance from the Helios lab. Most were corrupted, time-stamped years apart, but one file flickered open, grainy and monochrome. The camera showed a narrow corridor lined with glass panels. Two figures stood in the frame: Victor Hale, younger but unmistakable, and Daniel Reed, his face tense with fury. There was no sound, but their body language told the story. Daniel gestured to a folder in his hands, his movements sharp and urgent. Hale stepped closer, his expression cold, dismissive. Daniel slammed the folder onto a table, papers scattering like accusations. Hale said something, then turned away. Daniel reached for his arm. Hale jerked free and walked out of frame. The footage ended abruptly. Ava's breath shuddered. This was the last proof of her father alive inside that lab, fighting for his creation. Hours or days later, he was gone. Noah saved the file to an encrypted drive. He said, "We have enough to go public," voice low but steady. "But if we do, Hale will strike back, hard. He controls media outlets, legal teams, and politicians. He'll bury us before the story breathes." "Then we find someone he can't silence," Ava replied. "Someone who's already lost everything." She looked down at her hands, streaked faintly with dust from Wolf's box. Her father's legacy rested there now, fragile, luminous, dangerous. Noah closed the laptop and extinguished the lamp. Darkness filled the room, broken only by the glow of the city beyond the window. In that quiet, Ava made a vow again. Whatever the cost, she would drag the truth into the light. For her father, for herself, and for every voice Hale had buried beneath his empire of lies. Morning crept into the city wrapped in fog, soft and uncertain, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise on the truth Ava carried. She stood by the window of Noah's apartment, watching the world blur beyond the glass. The flash drive rested in her palm, its weight small yet immense, a vessel of ghosts and secrets. Behind her, Noah brewed coffee, the bitter scent filling the silence between them. Neither had slept. The discovery of the ledger, the video, and the shadowy payments replayed in their minds like fragments of a confession never spoken. Each clue sharpened the outline of a crime that reached beyond theft into something darker. But suspicion was not enough. They needed a name, a face, a living voice to confirm what the documents implied. Noah set the mug beside her. "I traced the firm Hale used, Linton and Gray. Before it dissolved, one of their contractors complained about unpaid wages. The record lists his name, Marcus Dale, former security specialist. Last known address, in South Dock." Ava turned the name over in her mind, tasting its promise. A man who had worked close enough to the fire to feel its heat. If he had seen something and been paid to silence it, he might still carry the memory, and guilt could be persuaded to speak. They left before the city fully woke. The bus rattled through damp streets, its windows streaked with mist. South Dock unfolded like a forgotten limb of the metropolis. warehouses with broken windows, graffiti-stained fences, alleys littered with rusted metal and stray cats. They found the address on a narrow street where time seemed to hold its breath. The building leaned against the fog, its bricks scarred, its door painted a weary green. Ava knocked once. The sound echoed through the quiet. After a moment, it opened a crack. A man peered out, his eyes wary beneath a hooded gaze. Deep lines etched his face, the kind carved by regret more than age. "What is it?" "We're looking for Marcus Dale," Noah said. "You found him." "Who's asking?" Noah flashed his badge. "Investigative reporter. We are reopening the Helios case." At the word Helios, Marcus's jaw tightened. His hand lingered on the door, poised to close it. "I'm not interested in old ghosts." Ava stepped forward, her voice steady. "My father was Daniel Reed. He disappeared after confronting Victor Hale. We have proof that Hale forged the contract and paid your firm through hidden accounts. You were there. You know what happened." His eyes flickered at the name, a crack in the wall. Silence stretched, heavy with old memories pressing to the surface. Finally, he sighed and opened the door wider. "Come in. But if you're chasing truth, be ready for what it costs." The apartment smelled of dust and oil. Tools lined the table, beside a half-empty bottle and a stack of unpaid bills. Marcus poured himself a drink with hands that trembled slightly, then sat across from them. "He began hiring me for a job and voiced a rough standard contract. Surveillance, access control, nothing unusual. But one night, Hale ordered a complete lockdown, said it was a security breach, told us to clear the corridors and keep everyone out except him and Reed." He stared into the glass, the reflection of his past shimmering there. Hours later, Hale came out alone, face pale, clothes disheveled. Said Reed left in a hurry, ordered us to wipe the tapes and destroy the logs. Ava felt the room tighten around her. "And you obeyed." "We all did. He paid us double to forget. Most took the money. I tried not to think about it, but something in his eyes. It wasn't relief. It was fear." Noah leaned forward. "Do you still have anything from that night? Files, receipts, access codes?" Marcus reached into a drawer and pulled out an old keycard and a folded paper. "I kept these. Couldn't throw them away." The card opens the sublevel at the old Helios site. The note is from Hale's assistant, who orders the rerouting of security footage to a private server. Ava took them gently, her pulse roaring in her ears. This was it, a door into the past sealed by lies. Marcus looked at her, eyes heavy with remorse. "If you go down there, be careful. Some truths don't want to be found." She met his gaze with quiet fire. "Then we'll find them anyway." Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the skyline in fractured light. Ava slipped the keycard into her pocket. Ahead lay the ruins of Helios, where the whispering walls still held the story of her father's final hours. The old Helios facility stood at the city's edge like a forgotten monument, its walls scarred by weather and time. Ivy clung to the cracked concrete, swallowing the faded letters that once spelled promise. Rusted gates hung ajar, groaning softly in the wind. Ava and Noah stepped through, their footsteps crunching over gravel and glass, the air heavy with the scent of rain and iron. The building loomed silent, its windows blind, its corridors waiting. This was where Daniel Reed had last been seen. Here, in the heart of ambition turned to ash, the truth had been buried. Ava gripped the keycard Marcus had given her, its edges worn but intact, a relic from the night everything changed. Inside, the air was colder. The walls bore the stains of neglect, graffiti layered over the ghosts of warning signs. They moved through the main hall, their flashlights slicing through dust and shadow. Faded posters of innovation and progress clung to the walls, slogans now hollow echoes of betrayal. Noah unfolded the map Marcus had sketched on the back of the note. Sub-level access is through the eastern wing, he murmured. Old freight elevator. Should still read the card. They followed the corridor to a cavernous room where machines slept under tarps and silence. The elevator waited in the corner, its metal doors streaked with rust. Ava swiped the keycard. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a faint chime broke the stillness and the doors slid open with a reluctant sigh. The car descended slowly, groaning as if straining under the weight of memory. The air grew cooler, thick with the scent of oil and damp concrete. When the doors parted again, darkness yawned before them. The sub-level stretched like a tunnel of forgotten intent. Rows of workstations stood frozen in disuse, papers scattered across tables, screens blank. In the center rose a chamber of glass and steel, the testing room where her father had labored, where genius had turned to silence. Ava stepped closer, her flashlight sweeping across the glass. Faint smudges lingered on its surface, fingerprints preserved like whispers. Inside, a console flickered weakly, a single light still pulsing after all these years. Noah crouched beside it, connecting his laptop to the port. "The system's still breathing," he said softly. "Old network, isolated. If Hale rerouted footage here, it might still be buried in the logs." Lines of code streamed across the screen. The machine's hum filled the chamber. A heartbeat, awakening after years of dormancy. Ava's gaze drifted to the walls, to the faint marks etched there. Measurements, equations, and a small inscription in her father's handwriting. For truth, not power. Her throat tightened. She traced the words with trembling fingers. He had known what he was building, and feared what Hale would make of it. A beep cut through the silence. Noah looked up, eyes sharp. "I found something. Encrypted video files. Time-stamped the night Daniel disappeared." He began the decryption, the screen pulsing as layers unraveled. Static burst across the monitor, then resolved into grainy footage. The camera overlooked the chamber. Daniel stood at the console, face drawn, voice silent in the soundless recording. He was speaking, gesturing toward data on the screen. Moments later, Hale entered, movements sharp, words edged with fury. They argued. Hale slammed a folder onto the console. Daniel shook his head, defiant. Hale stepped closer, voice rising. Then, suddenly, he struck, grabbing Daniel's arm, shoving him back. The camera jolted as if reacting to the violence. Daniel staggered, his hand catching the edge of the console. Lights flared. There was a blinding flash, then darkness. When the image returned, the chamber was empty. Abba's breath caught. Her father was gone. Hale stood alone in the aftermath, face pale, staring at the console as if it had swallowed the truth. He turned toward the camera, his eyes cold, then reached up and cut the feed. Noah exhaled slowly. This is it. Proof he was here. Proof that something happened. Ava stared at the frozen image, rage and sorrow converging into resolve. Her father had not vanished by choice. He had been erased. She copied the files onto the drive, her hands steady now. The walls seemed to whisper around her, the echoes of a man who had fought for integrity and paid with silence. When they ascended back into the fading light, the city stretched before them, vast and waiting. In her pocket, the flash drive burned like a promise. The truth was no longer hidden, and the man who had buried it would soon face the light he feared most. Evening settled over the skyline in slow, bruised colors as Ava and Noah returned to the apartment. The city below glimmered with indifferent beauty, unaware that its shining towers stood on stolen genius. The flash drive rested on the table between them, small and silent, yet it pulsed with the gravity of revelation. For hours they said little, each absorbed by the footage replaying in their minds. The confrontation, the flash, the emptiness that followed. The truth had shape now, and with it came danger. Noah paced before the window, fingers raking through his hair. "This changes everything," he said, "but it also paints a target on our backs. If Hale learns what we found, he'll move fast. He'll bury us before the story breathes." Ava sat still, eyes fixed on the drive. Let him try. My father spent his life chasing light. Hale used it to cast shadows. I won't let him keep the world blind. Noah stopped pacing, his voice softer. "Then we need a plan. Evidence means nothing if no one hears it. We go to the press, but not just one outlet. We scatter it. Multiple channels, independent networks, academic circles. Force the truth into the open all at once." Ava nodded, though fear coiled beneath her resolve. She thought of her frail and unaware mother, resting in their apartment across town. The danger would touch her too. Yet silence was no longer safety. It was complicity. They spent the night organizing the files. Videos, ledgers, the forged contract, the ledger entries tracing the payments, and testimonies from Wolf and Marcus. Piece by piece, they built the story into something undeniable. Noah drafted the report, his words sharp and measured, each line a strike against the empire of lies. Ava reviewed every frame of footage, memorizing her father's movements, his defiance, the moment before light consumed him. At dawn, the world outside shifted from gray to gold. Ava watched the sunlight crawl across the floor, the same light her father had studied, captured, and been betrayed by. The weight of it pressed against her chest, heavy yet cleansing. She felt him near, not as a ghost, but as a presence threaded through every equation, every truth reclaimed. Noah brewed coffee, his exhaustion hidden behind determination. "Once we release this," he said, "there's no turning back. Lawsuits, threats, maybe worse. You sure you're ready?" Ava met his gaze, her voice steady. "I've been waiting 10 years for this. He took my father's life. He won't take his legacy." They uploaded the evidence to encrypted servers, scheduling simultaneous releases across independent outlets, universities, and whistleblower platforms. The final step required only one command. Ava hesitated, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Then she pressed enter. The files launched into the digital ether, scattering like seeds on the wind. Minutes later, the first messages began to flood in. Journalists requesting interviews, professors confirming the authenticity of the research, forums igniting with outrage. The story spread like wildfire, headlines blazing across screens. Energy titan accused of theft and cover-up. Disappearance of scientist linked to corporate empire. Ava watched the words unfold, a tremor running through her. Her father's name appeared at last, no longer footnote or rumor, but truth reclaimed. Then the phone rang. Noah answered, listening in silence before handing it to her. "Miss Reed," a voice said, calm but clipped. "This is Victor Hale. We need to talk." For a moment the world stilled. Ava's pulse hammered in her ears. "There's nothing left to say," she replied. "The truth is already speaking." "You don't understand," Hale said, his tone edged with strain. "You've started something you can't control. Meet me tonight at the Concord Tower. I'll give you what you want." The line clicked dead. Noah's expression hardened. "It's a trap." "Maybe," Ava said, slipping the drive into her pocket. "But it's also an invitation, and I intend to finish what he began." Outside, the sun climbed higher, washing the city in brightness that revealed every flaw. The empire Hale built was trembling, and the light her father had chased now burned through its foundation. Ava stood tall, the weight of truth heavy in her hands, but no longer unbearable. The reckoning had begun. The Kongor Tower loomed above the city like a monument to ambition, its glass skin reflecting the fading light of dusk. Ava stood at its base, the wind tugging at her coat, the flash drive resting in her pocket like a heartbeat. She had come alone, though Noah waited in a car a block away, eyes fixed on the building's entrance, radio crackling softly with their agreed signal. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble and silence. The receptionist was gone, the lights dimmed to a sterile glow. Ava's footsteps echoed as she approached the private elevator. The panel displayed a single illuminated floor number at the top, the penthouse. She pressed the button. The doors slid shut with a whisper, sealing her in a chamber of rising tension. When the elevator opened, she stepped into a room of glass and steel, panoramic windows framing a city drenched in twilight. Victor Hale stood by the far wall, his silhouette sharp against the skyline. He turned slowly, eyes weary but burning with something fierce, a mixture of pride, fear, and resignation. "You force my hand, Ava," he said. "The world thinks it knows everything now, but you don't see the whole picture." "I've seen enough," she replied. "You stole from my father, imprisoned him, and built an empire on his silence. That's the picture." Hale's jaw tightened. He moved to a console, pressing a key. A projection flickered to life on the glass wall, a schematic pulsing with lines of light, the perfected model of the Solaris core. "Your father's vision was beautiful," he said quietly. "But it was unstable. It could have destroyed everything. I finished what he began. I made it safe." "You made it profitable," Ava countered. "At the cost of his life." Hale's voice cracked. He was going to reveal it too soon. Investors were circling like vultures. Governments wanted control. If he'd gone public, they would have buried him. And the technology. "I did what I had to do. You took his name. You took his freedom." Hale's eyes flashed with something close to regret. "I kept him alive. You think I wanted that facility? It was the only way to protect the secret until the world was ready." Ava stepped closer, her voice trembling but firm. "And who decided when the world would be ready? You? The man who locked away a brilliant mind and called it mercy?" Hale's composure cracked. He turned away, gripping the edge of the console. "For years I told myself it was for the greater good. I'd make it right someday when the world could understand. But there's no right anymore. Only what's left." "Then do the one decent thing you have left," Ava said. "Tell the truth." The silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Outside, the city lights shimmered like distant stars. Finally, Hale exhaled, long and shuddering. "The data you released is only part of it. There's a vault, records, footage, everything. It proves your father's authorship. It proves what I did. Where is it?" Hale walked to a panel beside the glass wall and placed his palm on the scanner. A hidden door slid open, revealing a narrow corridor to a secure chamber bathed in cold blue light. Inside, rows of servers hummed softly. Hale gestured toward the terminal. "It's all here. You can take it. The world deserves the truth." Ava approached the console, inserting her drive. Files began to transfer, streams of data reflecting across her determined eyes. Behind her, Hale stood motionless, his empire collapsing within and without. When it was done, Ava turned to leave. Hale spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I wanted to build a legacy. Now all I've built is a monument to greed." She met his gaze one last time. "Legacy isn't what you build for yourself. It's what you return to those you stole it from." As she stepped into the elevator, Hale remained in the chamber, staring into the flickering blue. When the doors closed, a single muted sound echoed behind her, a final confession, swallowed by the hum of machines. Outside, the night was breaking into dawn. Noah rushed to her side, relief washing over his face. "Did you get it?" Ava lifted the drive, glowing faintly with transfer truth. "It's over," she said. The story spread faster than before. With the full archive released, every lie unraveled. Victor Hale's empire dissolved under the weight of evidence and remorse. Robert Reed's name was restored, and his work was credited to the hands that birthed it. Weeks later, Eva stood beside her father in a sunlit lab, new blueprints glowing on the table. The world had changed, and so had she. The fight had burned away the fear, leaving only clarity.
Truth, once buried, had risen with the morning light. Her father smiled, eyes bright with pride. "Ready to begin again?" Eva nodded, her heart steady. Not to begin, to continue. For him, for all who believe that light, once found, can never be stolen again.